Welcome to the ACEIT podcast, where we turn science into sense. As we begin our 11th season, I wanted to let you know that JCOIN has a new O. That's right. The formerly Justice Community Opioid Innovation Network is now the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network. Same wonderful network, same awesome podcast, but with a broader emphasis. So I am so excited that you're with us. I'm Danielle Rudes, your host, and this is ACEIT. Welcome to episode 6 of season 11 of the ACEIT podcast. On today's episode of our season on substance use disorder, overdose, and loved ones, we're talking all about friends' experiences. First, we'll talk about friends' experiences of witnessing an overdose, including some important context, and also people's decision-making about using Naloxone and calling 911. After this, we'll talk about the different outcomes people describe after witnessing a friend's overdose and/or drug-related death, including their complex grieving processes, mental health struggles, and substance misuse. Today, let's dive right into that research. All right, focusing first on witnessing an overdose. Studies that document that people who use drugs are highly likely to witness the overdose of one of their friends. For instance, Lagu and colleagues, 2006, surveyed 329 people who use drugs and found that roughly 65% of people had witnessed a friend's overdose. In a more recent study, Nolte and colleagues, 2023, found a similar, albeit even higher statistic. They surveyed 589 people who use drugs and found that 84% of these people had witnessed a friend's overdose. These numbers suggest that witnessing overdose is a common occurrence among peers who use drugs. Interestingly, too, according to a report put out in 2017 by the National Institutes of Health by Lepari and Hughes, 2017, it appears that most people obtain their drugs from friends and family members, in other words, not from drug dealers, highlighting how drugs circulate within peer networks. Then, looking at people's decision-making about Naloxone and calling 911, the research paints a bit of a complicated picture. When we're discussing this, it's important to consider the mental state that people are often in when they witness a friend's overdose. For instance, Nolte and colleagues, 2023, detail how interviews describe feeling scared, freaked out, panicked, or frozen while witnessing an overdose. Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk first about Naloxone, an overdose reversal drug. In those two studies I just referenced, Lagu and colleagues and Nolte and colleagues, they both found interesting results about willingness to aid in the event of a friend's overdose. Lagu and colleagues, 2006, found that roughly 89% of people were willing to administer overdose reversal medication. Interestingly, they found that participants who had used heroin, had injected drugs, had witnessed a drug overdose, or had a history of accidental drug overdoses were slightly or significantly more willing to aid in the event of a friend's overdose. Nolte and colleagues 2023 reported that roughly half of their participants remarked that they were trained to recognize and respond to an overdose, suggesting that the other half of the sample would not be able to assist in the event of an overdose. Okay, now on to calling 911 for medical assistance. This is where the picture gets complicated. While scholars document that people want to help their friends during an overdose, they are often hesitant or reluctant to call 911 for assistance, mainly out of fear of legal repercussions, like being arrested for homicide in the event that they supplied their friend with the drugs. In a review of this phenomenon, Miller, 2021, presents a case of an incident like this based on several research reports. She writes, quote, "One night, you purchased just enough heroin to share with your friend. You both inject a portion of the heroin. She did not pay you for her share, and you simply picked it up and delivered the drugs. That night, she begins to overdose. Local law enforcement investigates the death as a possible homicide and discovers text messages between you and your friend. The messages reveal that you were the one who brought the heroin to her that day. Now you are charged and convicted with drug-induced homicide for the death of your friend because you obtained and gave her the drugs that killed her," unquote. From this depiction, we can see why some people might be scared to call 911 out of fear of legal repercussions. Miller then goes on to discuss drug-induced homicide statutes and overdose Good Samaritan laws. As the names suggest, drug-induced homicide statutes charge those who supplied the drugs to their friends, even if they tried to save their friend. And Good Samaritan laws offer some legal protection in the event that the person tried to save their friend's life. 20 states have adopted drug-induced homicide statutes, while 40 states and the District of Columbia have adopted overdose Good Samaritan statutes. There's an overlap of these laws as well. Of the 20 states that have adopted drug-induced homicide statutes, 18 have also adopted an overdose Good Samaritan statute. Increasingly, Miller cites studies that document that the homicide laws are not targeting the drug dealers the law intends to target. Rather, the law is most often used against the deceased loved ones. Other research backs up Miller's claim. For instance, she cites a study conducted in 2000 in San Francisco, which found that only 53% of people who witnessed overdoses sought medical assistance, citing fear of police involvement as the reason why they did not call 911. Nolte and colleagues 2023 also discussed this in their paper. Despite knowing about Good Samaritan laws, only half of their participants who witnessed an overdose called 911, and they cited legal consequences as their rationale. Specifically, these people were uncertain whether they would be protected by Good Samaritan laws when they had outstanding warrants, were on probation or parole, or had large amounts of drugs on them at the time of their friend's overdose. Taken together, these studies show that while people want to help their friends in the event of an overdose, there are several barriers in place to them doing so. Okay, now, on to the second half of our discussion today. Let's talk about the different outcomes people describe after witnessing a friend's overdose and/or drug-related death, including their complex grieving process, mental health struggles, and substance misuse. After the loss of a friend to a drug overdose, people experience complex grief. For instance, O'Callaghan and Lambert, 2024, interviewed 6 people who lost a friend to an overdose. Participants detailed how the loss hit them especially hard, given that their peers often filled a void in their lives, taking the place of absent role models. Many people remarked that their friends were, quote, like family. Their peers also provided them a, quote, safe haven from societal alienation via their shared experiences and mutual understanding. After their friends die, people experience a, quote, shattered reflection of their friend and of society, seeing how society devalued the loss of their friend due to their drug involvement. Others describe feeling as though they were not allowed to grieve, quote, properly. For instance, Marco, one of the study participants, described how he was judged by his friend's family when he attended the funeral. This, quote, inhibited grief has been captured in other studies as well. Like McMadu and colleagues 2022 participants who described not being able to even attend their friend's memorial, recalling, quote, it was kind of fucked up. I couldn't even say goodbye at all, unquote. Importantly, these narratives also highlight the presence of social alienation following the drug-related death of a friend. These studies also capture how some people experience survivor's guilt after their friend has died, particularly recognizing that they easily could have been the one to overdose given their own drug misuse. Looking at mental health struggles post-bereavement, which are deeply tied into the complex grief that people experience, most research focuses on the impact of witnessing overdose on post-traumatic stress and suicidality. McMadu and colleagues' 2022 study that I just mentioned, where they interviewed 25 people who lost a friend to overdose, detailed how people experience overdose as highly traumatic. Nolte and colleagues' 2023 study mentioned earlier found the same thing. Using statistical analysis, they found that witnessing an overdose was associated with heightened PTSD symptoms. The literature on this topic also details how bereavement increases people's suicidal ideation. For instance, some participants in O'Callaghan and Lambert's 2024 study viewed death as, quote, an escape from the grief they felt, with one participant, Marco, recalling, quote, if anything, I wanted to be in my friend's position. At that time, I wanted to die. McMadu and colleagues' 2022 study found the same results. Taken together, these studies identify several mental health impacts of overdose bereavement on friends. Finally, let's look at the impact of overdose bereavement on friends' own substance use. What we know about this topic comes from aforementioned studies by O'Callaghan and Lambert and McMado and colleagues, 2022 and 2024. In O'Callaghan and Lambert's study, all interviewees describe having an existing substance misuse problem that was made worse by their friend's death. The authors attribute this to being overwhelmed by grief and societal alienation. Similarly, in McMado and colleagues' study, several interviewees described increasing their drug use in order to manage feelings of grief and trauma. Interestingly, however, and contrary to what O'Callaghan and Lambert found, other participants describe either not changing their substance use or actually decreasing their substance use in the wake of their friend's death. For those who reduced their risk, they did so out of fear of their own potential for overdose and because they did not want to cause their families the same bereavement-related pain that they had experienced. For instance, one interviewee commented, quote, "Now I'm starting to realize that, wow, I don't want to hurt somebody. If I'm gone, that person's going to be hurting. They're going to be upset. They're going to be distraught. You know what I mean? I don't want to put my mother through that," unquote. Finally, for those who did not change their substance misuse, they attributed this to already engaging in harm reduction measures, feeling desensitized to the possibility of overdose, and ambivalence about living, which ties into the suicidality findings discussed earlier. All this research suggests that friends' overdose carries significant implications for a person's own drug use behavior. Okay, with that, we've reached the end of our episode on friends' experiences with substance use disorder and overdose. I'll talk to you on the next episode where we'll be covering involved loved ones in addiction and overdose treatment. As a reminder, if after listening to this episode you need support, please contact the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Thank you for listening to the Aced It podcast. We love hearing from you. So if you have comments, topics to suggest, or some science you'd like us to cover in a future season, please write to me, Danielle Rudes, at Sam Houston State University in Texas. My email is drudes, D-R-U-D-E-S, at shsu.edu. And of course, thank you to the Justice Community Overdose Innovation Network, JCOIN's Coordination and Translation Center, funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, housed at George Mason University, where this podcast originated. Thank you to our fabulous scriptwriter and also my fantastic doctoral student, Bryce Kushmerek McCune. And a huge and heartfelt thank you to the team at Slonky LLC for their wonderful podcast production, as always. Tune in again for another episode of Aced It.